everything indie games related. And we're building a little community for anyone involved in indie games or anyone thinking about getting into making games for themselves. So we will be recording. I hope you're all okay with that. Please keep it family friendly for YouTube, please. Hi, YouTube. Yeah, so throw some emojis up on the screen, please, and welcome Twijnstra, sorry, from Story Giant Games, a master of the craft of game design, and probably the most popular mentor from Google Play's prestigious Indie Games Accelerator. We'd love to have your questions, but please put them in the chat or save them for the end, because Tj'ièn has quite a lot of different slides to get through. We hope that you will come and join our Discord server, which is where the magic happens. And I think you'll probably find the link for that in the chat as we go along. So yeah, huge round of applause. And thank you so much for joining us. Tj'ièn, I'm going to hand over to you now.
Thank you. And my last name in Dutch is Twijnstra, but I know that's horrible. But Tj'ièn is excellent.
Twijnstra? I'm sorry.
Twijnstra. Yeah. Like the A sound is really Dutch.
Really appreciate you teaching us.
Okay, let's get to it, guys. So designing value. Earn more game design techniques that boost your bottom line. Well, we're going to talk about value and how we're going to create value and what value actually is. And we're going to take a look at that from different perspectives. First, a little intro on me. I'm Tj'ièn. I worked at a bunch of companies in the past and currently published over 25 games with them. Anything from console, handheld, PC, mobile, porting, etc. You can find some stuff on my blog. I've been in the design space mostly, but also a little bit of production here and there as well. And I do consulting through secretofgames.com. So that's my pitch quickly. Now I'm currently part of Story Giant Games as the game director. And our latest game is Text Express. It just got re-signed with Quali, amazing publisher. It's been excellent so far. And I'm just going to quickly show you what that's about for those people that don't know. Let me see how we can start this. That was Text Express. This always takes like 3 clicks to get out of a video, but yeah. So we're talking about value, but first a little bit of context, and anyone that has been releasing games on mobile knows this context, but just as a refresher, and sometimes it's good to also for myself to get a reminder of what we're actually doing. And there are over like 1,000 releases each day. So that already tells you a little bit about how crowded this market is. They're all direct competitors as they're all in the game space, right? There are also hundreds of apps being released each day. Almost all of the games that are released are free to play. This is actually an old graph, like a few years back already. I think it's higher now, like 98% probably is free to play. Versus the rest, it's paid or premium, and I think still the discoverability is our biggest challenge. And basically, you put your game somewhere in this haystack, and then there's someone looking for games that finds the total haystack, and they probably don't even know what they're looking for. And this is just an organic, of course. But still, this is kind of the situation. So you can think about how to stand out. should we build a community? Should we reach out to influencers, right? On the other side, user acquisition, of course, maybe strategic partnerships, maybe through Apple and Google, although featuring doesn't do all that much anymore, unfortunately. It's still good to have those extra installs happening, but also partnership happen through brands, happen through maybe partnering up with other games as well. Yeah, some editorial promotions, press maybe even, but on mobile, press hardly has an influence. Anyway, I do think that means that originality and creativity are no longer a luxury to stand out, right? So it's going to be part of the design. But even if you have like a game that's becoming a hit, it's really like Wordle back in the day. It's being cloned faster than you can say the word clone, so that immediately poses another threat as well. Then talking about our audience hardly has any commitment to the actual activity of gaming on your mobile. Especially with free-to-play games, there's even lower commitment because there's no upfront cost. And if there was an upfront cost like a premium, you wouldn't care so much if they played because they already paid for the game, right? But in our case, having low commitment is really bad. And it also on a device that has no real dedicated game time. Because it's the most distracting device that is ever invented. Right, so you do everything on it. Communication, social media is a huge distraction. And I actually think yesterday I witnessed a presentation about the game industry in total, and you see a decline in total number of play hours worldwide. And I think TikTok could be a reason, right? It is so engaging. I think it's stealing play time, actually, not just from other platforms, but also especially from games. Yeah, and then there's streaming, there's notifications, and all the apps, etc., and all the other games on your device, right? It's like the most distracting thing there is. And we're also playing in the most distracting places that there are, right? If you're waiting on the bus, well, you have to look and see if the bus is arriving or not. There's noise around you. Like, yeah, it's a pretty tough environment to make games on, actually. And if that wasn't enough, we also have in-game competition. So I think we're the only medium that allows the direct competitors in the door, right? It's just like selling Big Macs at your KFC restaurant, right? We have in-game ads showing our biggest competitors, and that basically allowing our players that, yeah, we're pretty hard to get into our game to also walk out pretty fast. So that's interesting. But it also means that in this tough environment, I think game design should include monetization. And that this talk is about monetization and about value. But I think what should come actually also now in game design as a starter is marketing. Right, so first you needed to only have a focus on a good game, maybe focus on a good game for a particular market. Now that's still true. Then you need to still think about monetization upfront, maybe from your concept on, and also think about how you're going to reach your players. That now needs to become part of game design, in my view. This talk focuses on value and games that want to entice players that are playing a free game to pay something, of course, need to offer that value. So what is value? And we can look at the dictionary definition. That's always like a standard in these kind of presentations. Okay, what is it? Value? Is it? And you read all these things like monetary worth, fair return, exchange, and relative worth, intrinsic value. As if you're designing value, this doesn't really help that much. So I think the main takeaway there are some more, but I think the main takeaway of this presentation is that value is always perceived against a context. And I will come back to that in a little bit later. But first, I want to offer two contexts, which is the player side of things and us as the creator side of things for value, right? So why do we make games? What do we value in games, right? Of course, we want to make money. It's our business. It's our job. So that's obvious. But a lot of us are also in it to make some kind of art. We think that what we make is a particular craft and we get enjoyment out of that. Of course, we enjoy it ourselves. We think it's fun to make games. And if people really like it, it's also good for our ego, right? They like something we help make. And if the press likes it, maybe we easily grow a bigger ego, right? So if we focus on the money part, though, right, there are several ways of how to make money on games: in-app purchases, ads. I don't think these will be new things for you. Subscriptions, and of course, the game will then have to have retention and stickiness and engagement to make sure that there's enough time to convince players to make that value. And of course, organic growth helps in that process, as well as lower CPIs, etc. Those are things you know. Then from the player side, right? So we have all of these things for value and where we think about. And then for the player side, it's actually really simple. They just care about the fun of the game. And that's it. If it's fun, I like it, right? And actually, if you think about that a little bit more, because fun is still super abstract, then it's about time well spent, right? If they're playing a game, they will think, do I enjoy it enough? Is this the best I could spend my time? If not, I'm going to do something else. And that actually provides us a little hook, and we'll find that out later in the presentation. It provides us a little hook on how we can look at value against time well spent, for instance. And then again, I'm going to talk about how this is perceived against the context. So a toilet paper roll, what is it worth, right? And that's a pretty hard question to ask. Right, you can think about the price in the supermarket, but is it valuable? Well, absolutely, in some cases, right? If you run out of toilet paper when you can't use it, then the value for you increases, and if there's plenty, the value kind of decreases, right? And it's on the one hand, you can say, yeah, this is kind of the scarcity effect, and it's true, but the scarcity effect is actually saying that whatever the value is, the context kind of determines the value, right? And that, I think that's really important to understand, because you as game designers and game developers will have a say over the context. You create the context, which is the game, right? And that's why it's important. So then how do we monetize this? Well, there are only three ways, I think. Which is either you provide more of what you love to the player, and that requires an understanding of what the player loves in your game. And that also means that if you can provide more, that also means that the player wants more. So maybe you need to limit some things that they really value in order to be able to provide it later for money. Of course, you can remove something that is unpleasant from the equation, or you can keep what the players are used to. And in a lot of cases, this means keeping a particular progression cadence. If you slowly stretch out the content, but you offer means to be as fast, the players be as fast as they were in the beginning, then that's something they will absolutely value. And some will even pay money for to make that happen. So why is monetization in free-to-play so hard? And I think it has to do with the fact that we want it all. And what does that mean? Well, I think we all want our games to be fun and fair. We don't want to be evil. And there are evil ways. And for me, personally, that would be gambling systems, because we're pretty bad at, as humans, we're pretty bad at looking at chance. We think chance increases For instance, the more we press a button, which is actually not the case, chance will always be the same, and we're really bad at understanding that. But that is for everybody. What is evil is their personal thing. But most of us don't want to be evil. We want to make sure that the game is great for someone that is playing for free, but we also want to make sure the game is great for our players. And this, because we want all of this at the same time, and they're not mutually exclusive, but sometimes they are, and sometimes they kind of overlap, and it's a really hard puzzle. And I think, one of the things I like to kind of collect over time, and this is one of them, is the unwritten rules of game design. They're so obvious that you don't know them, but games need to be fair. And I think that's I think that's obvious for everyone here. Now I'm gonna look at value through different kind of perspectives. I call it lenses, but you get the point. And there are many more than I will discuss here. I'm just offering a few. So one of the lenses is the lens of the customer. And what I've done is taking a look at the traditional customer journey that's been developed through retail and sales, and it's a very well-known principle over there. And then looked at it, okay, how does this work in free-to-play? So the traditional customer journey works like this. People need to become aware of a product. And of course, you can use advertising, word of mouth, brand recognition. There's all these ways of becoming aware that something exists, right? And they're all used. And then as a consumer, you will think about it. Well, do I want this, right? Do I want this particular product? So you'll prepare for a purchase, and usually the bigger the purchase is, the more research you do. So there's active evaluations, there's reviews online, and all that kind of research phase, right? Could also be faster in some cases, especially lower priced things will take less time to consider. It becomes more of an impulse buy, and then at some point you'll make the decision. After that, the player or the consumer uses a product. Sometimes they have some guidance that they need. If they can find it, that's better, of course. But basically, they will evaluate the purchase and the product against their expectations, right? And if everything goes well, then some will become an advocate of the product. Good or bad, right? It can go two ways. Most of the people will stay kind of in the middle, say nothing, but maybe decide never to buy something ever again of that brand, or love the brand. But that's kind of how a typical consumer product journey looks like. If you look at free-to-play, it's kind of the same, but also not. So with a mobile free-to-play, there's still the same phases, right? So there's awareness. You need to become aware, and which is actually in the beginning, right, how hard that is. But once you know, the consideration phase is usually very short, right? There is a low barrier of entry. It's not a huge amount of money. Actually, it's free, right? So it's more of an impulse and curiosity thing for a lot of players to just install the game and have a go. But that also comes with the very low investment and very low commitment of that player, right? So it's an impulse thing, but they leave just as fast as they come. And download size is still a little bit of a barrier in most countries, where well, I think almost everywhere in the world people are on data. So in most cases they will want to wait for larger downloads. At home, they might forget about your game again. But overall, a way lower barrier of entry. And then, of course, the player in this case will play the game and retain. Again, they might need some guidance. Games can do that automatically through their onboarding. And all the while they're playing, they are evaluating if they like it or not. Is my time well spent? And that's a constant consideration, right? Every minute they're playing, and usually not consciously thinking about it, but they are evaluating nonetheless. And then what's interesting with in-app purchases is that you actually have the same customer journey, but then in your game, right? Your players will need to be aware that a in-app purchase exists, right, before they can consider it. And actually, so there's this customer journey inside another customer journey, right? So actually, there are two customer journeys happening at the same time. And so all the steps that a customer would take to buy something in the real world are also the steps that happen in your game. And for every purchase, again, right? So every time you want to offer something, or every time the player is confronted with a purchase, they will have to go through the whole steps and the whole process again. And in the end, if the player likes it enough and finds the value in the in-app purchases or in the ads that they're watching and get enough in return, they might turn into advocates, right? And then you'll see the reviews being good or bad on Google Play Store or iOS Store. But that means that the customer commitment must be earned, and the value must be broadcasted and demonstrated in the context of the game, right? Then I'm gonna now switch over to another perspective and look at, okay, can we think of things that are valuable from the motivation that players are playing their game? So there are some resources online that talk about motivation and player behavior. There's the Facebook did a research. There's Quantic Foundry. I think it's 8 player types or something like that. And there's some more research. Google did something. And what I try to do is bundle every free resource that I could find and see where they would overlap and where some of them would have holes compared to the other research that was there. And I just basically took everything and put it into one system. So for me, this feels more complete than any of those in isolation. And what I distilled from that research is that there are 10 like broad motivational reasons why players play. And those are these, and we'll go through each one of those and maybe how we can add value for each in this model. And there will be a link later if you're interested in this model. What I added and what I really missed from the research is that all of the motivations were really more from a hardcore kind of player perspective. But I'm a game designer in the casual space, which means lower dedication and overall, but that also changes kind of what players expect and why they are playing. A dedicated player motivation is much deeper and goes further than a casual one. And we'll have some examples on how that relates to some of the things in value. As a quick example, most players will play for a bunch of reasons. I kind of modeled myself as an example here. So this is kind of why I like to play. But yeah, that's for everyone. That's a little bit different. Some will be super into one thing. I'm a bit broader. Yeah, and everyone will be a bit different there. If we look at social connections, so players that are really into playing together and playing for that social connection, then we can see that they are very much like the more casual players will kind of compare things, while more hardcore players, they will either really want to collaborate a lot or they want to really beat the other and make sure they're the best. Right, but you can, if you know that you're serving these type of players, you can then look at that and how you can add value to that particular need that they have. For instance, you can think of ways that players can participate in certain social events, or celebrate their social skills, for instance, through a collaboratory event, saying, hey guys, the more people join, the better the reward will be, and then kind of foster that social need that players bring to your game or want from your game. If we're looking at mastery and expertise, things that you can then feel players value a lot. People that really want to master something are prepared to practice a lot. And that means that they will retry and retry until they've mastered it, right? And that's something that a lot of games also monetize on, right? Either through hindering progress, so you have to make the next level. But in a esports game, you can also think about retries and continues and practice rounds as something that can be monetized. Not necessarily a good idea, but it's something that is connecting to the player on that level where they, for the reason why they play that game. But also, for instance, in esports, and I think that could be very interesting, is to provide way more analytics tools to those players that are really into esports, right? A casual player might not be super interested. And I think, for instance, a game like a competitive fighting game like Street Fighter or any of the others that have like frame-by-frame analysis and hitboxes and like all of those stats, they are being really analyzed, and strategies are formed to exploit or become better at those games. So yeah, in a free-to-play version, that could be monetized, I think. Players that are really into discovery, and there you see quite some bit of a fluctuation between casual and more hardcore players. Casual players are more about being surprised rather than searching for something new. So they like to be surprised, and they like the fact that something new is presented, but don't really necessarily want to have put in the effort. But if you go all the way to hardcore or even beyond hardcore, there will be players that will want to break the game, do speed runs, do like find cheats and way of like how the game isn't really meant to be played, but they'll find their own way of how to deal with that. And that's super interesting, but it requires a lot of dedication. But those would be things then that you can think about and find ways to monetize, right? Maybe playing a speed running game with cheats is not exactly how it's meant to be. But if you could be more aware of where how the rules can be bent or manipulated in certain cases, it could be very interesting for players, for those very hardcore players. A lot of players are playing for escaping their daily routine, so you can absolutely reward players for that with login bonuses and boosters, just saying, hey guy, you're back, nice to see you again, and make sure that they feel appreciated that they're doing that. Escapism is also a lot to do with storytelling, being in another world. You're actually literally escaping to some other place in your head and on the screen. If you take that like to the extreme, then those players want to take the game world into their own world, right? And then merchandise becomes something that's super valuable. Real life role playing events are an example of super dedicated players that are all into escapism. Then the people that value power and control value autonomy, so they want to feel that they are actually owning the experience. Of course, weapons and power-ups and things that will make the player feel great make a lot of sense in that case, but also status decorations, right? If you're a player that wants to like show off your power and control over a game, and the game kind of rewards you with medals or other decorations you can show off to other players, that becomes very valuable for these kind of players. Of course, there are games that are played to de-stress and for relaxation. Those are a little bit harder to monetize because often in cases of friction, you kind of don't want to put in a lot of friction or hindrance because that kind of is the opposite of the experience. And what you actually want to make sure of is that the whole experience kind of flows as a continuous progress. So anything that kind of stops that, you could put that up as a hindrance, as a friction mechanic, and players can then take that away to ensure that they're having a smooth ride. But also personalization, customization, playing around with the different moods. If it's a real relaxation games, right, you can either like relax or de-stress, or there's different ways that the player wants to feel. It's kind of related also to escapism as well, but it's also way more personal in a lot of cases. But it's a little bit trickier to monetize than some of the more obvious reasons players play. And it was funny. It was missing in most, like Quantic Foundry doesn't talk about relaxation in games, but Facebook did, which was interesting. But I do think it's a large portion of players that actually like de-stress with games. More obvious is thrill and excitement. Again, the gachas and spin wheels come close because they offer that kind of excitement. On a very accessible kind of way. In the end, players that really seek these thrill and excitement will want to have more content. Want to be like re-engaged, want to discover new things. Then looking at strategy and management, these players really value controlling chaos, and I was thinking about what can you offer players that want to control chaos, which is actually something like they want to know what they will get out of it up front. So try before you buy tactics could very well work with strategy and management games. But I also think like card battlers are also a good example of like strategy games where each new thing that you're adding can change the whole system through the emergent rules that kind of come into play. So that's also a very nice way to hook these players in. If you add to basically everything that you add to the game changes the whole game, basically creates a new chaos in the game that the players will have to relearn and overcome and strategize about. So this is a really interesting space, I think. I think this is the last one of the player motivation. It's a long stretch, I know, in the presentation. But expression, players that want to express themselves. On the casual side, it's through options, through changing the story, through like influence the story or influence the presentation of the game. And that's the further you go, the more dedicated players will need to become, right? If you offer customization, you can do it on an easy casual level, but the more depth you offer the player there, the more dedicated you need to be in order to make characters or whatever is customizable in your game. And eventually, even though a lot of the games that might have customization are single player games, it would even, for the super dedicated, they want to show off their creations. Like if they spend like hours on making a cool character, it's even cooler if someone else can say, hey, that's pretty cool what you did there, right? So offering ways of showcasing what you did as a player is also very valuable and can be monetized. Another one, completion and ownership. So this is about collecting and basically what these players like. I think all players like progression. It's actually what I think is fun about games is the fact that they make progress, but the collectors kind of have that visual representation inside their collections. Again, you can monetize that through gachas. It's not my favorite one, but it is a way of doing that. And again, showcasing collections can add some additional value there as well. Different lens. So yeah, this part was why players play. That is something that is valuable, right? Then I'm going to talk about the structure of progress. So as I already kind of hinted on, for me, what is fun is progression, and I think it's like kind of abstract, but I think humans are always looking to improve the situation. Everything needs to move forward, and I think that makes us really different from animals, where animals are kind of okay with the status quo, right? You don't actively see animals getting better. It's just like animals they're all doing their thing, but humans want to be better. Like, I think that's kind of drives us all, or at least the majority of people. And I think that's why we kind of enjoy progression as well. So this kind of ties into that. So value as progression. And I'm going to talk about 3 progression structures, and they're all kind of related to each other. A linear progression, kind of a meta progression, and an elastic meta progression. And I'm going to talk about why I kind of like the last one the best. But let's go through them, because it is a bit of an abstract thing. So let's make it a bit less abstract. Linear progress is really easy. You play a level, you get a reward, right? The fact that you ended the level will give you a reward. Let's say it's a piece of story or an item for your collection. Doesn't matter. So this would be a very linear kind of way. And this is very, very rigid. It's very close. There's not a lot you can add here in terms of value. And how you would monetize a game like this is basically stopping the player from making that progress. So the fail condition is kind of the only way to monetize this effectively. Then a lot of games will feature this kind of structure, where completing a level will extract something from the level, which is, for instance, stars. Right, so you'll get a star in Royal Match for completing a level, right? Or Gardenscapes, you get the star, and then for that 1 star, you get a reward, which is a bit of story or like a 3-piece decoration thing. You can make a choice on how the garden looks. Those kind of things are rewards, but they've separated the structure in such a way that you can play levels and you can collect those rewards later, right? And that adds a little bit more flexibility, because then they can also say, well, some things require 2 stars and some might 3 stars, right? But it's not super flexible. It's still, you can't go and say 100 stars at some point. That doesn't feel fair. So it's still heavily dependent on the fail condition to monetize. And when working on TextExpress, we didn't have a fail condition. Word games are horrible to replay, because half of it you still know the words that you just put in, and you're still stuck on the word that you couldn't find, right? So that makes a very bad replayable thing. So for TextExpress, we developed this different, and I'll call it an elastic meta. Maybe there's an official term for it. But rather than extracting 1 point, we're extracting many points from a level. And with TextExpress, every letter you put in a word is 1 point in the beginning. And then we're going to say, so here it's not too obvious, but let's say it's way more granular than the stars, right? So let's say a task requires maybe 10 points in the beginning, but 50 points a bit further, at some point maybe even 1,000 points, right? And then we give the players means to extract more and more out of each level, and that's where the value becomes apparent, because of that flexibility. You can now say, okay, you did a great job. What about watching an ad for some more points? And what about maybe upgrading the letter so they're worth more points, so you can even extract endlessly more points as you're upgrading all your letters, right? And suddenly you have these two things that can be monetized. And I think, and then what the reward just requires an X amount of points, right? And that also I can like stretch that very far further in the game, right? We have levels in Text Express that require 4,000 points, right? And the player, if they never upgrade in Text Express, they might take 100 levels to get to that point. But because that happens real late in the game, players have the ability to upgrade all their letters, to have the ability to add other stuff to make sure they're extracting more and more points. Then it still requires 3 levels to play. And so that's where you can play around a lot with the value and have the player have a real meaningful influence on the value that can be monetized. So having the right progression structure really affords value in that case. Let's take a look at the time. Yeah, some biases. I think a lot of the talks about player behavior are about player biases, and this is the Cognitive Bias Codex. You can probably Google it, and I'll just pick out a few that I think are really interesting. And these are, like, biases are kind of universal for a lot of players, but not for everyone. So they work for like 98%, and not everyone is susceptible to each bias. But they can have an drastic effect on your monetization. What I really like to be aware of is the anchoring bias. And this basically is the first time you encounter something that becomes the proof point in your perception. So it sets a baseline. And when we're talking about context, that's where the context first gets created for you as a player. So the first time you play as a player, you're still open to the experience. Anything can happen, but from the first time, the first level, everything kind of says, okay, this is this kind of game. This will happen. Oh, there's an ad, so ads are part of the experience or not, right? Oh, there's coins, so I guess I need to have coins. All of that sets kind of a baseline. Just super good to be aware of, and that's, I think, why you always hear a lot of people talking about why the FTUE is so important. It's actually because it determines basically how the player looks at anything else you introduce later, right? So if ads were not part of the experience at the beginning and you add them in session 2 or session 10, all of a sudden that's a surprise to the player, right? But it's not a surprise in the very first time. It's just like, oh, this game has ads, right? They still might not like it, but it's not a surprise. So that's why I really like the anchoring effect. Then there's the IKEA effect, which is also funny. Like, the more we as a player get involved in making something or shaping something, the more we like it, just because we put in the effort. And of course, IKEA knows this, which is, I think, why it's called like that. The sunken cost effect is also very clear. If I invest in something, then I'm likely to invest or want to invest more into it. You see that happening on the stock market, but you see that happening in games as well, with the very first purchase being the hardest. And then subsequent purchases are easier for a lot of players. So that's something to be aware of. A lot of games that are aware of this will try to offer like starting packs or like heavy discounts for the players to get that first one, and then after that the discounts kind of disappear, or larger packs or heavier price points are introduced. Zeigenrick effect is also something I'm aware of. I kind of hate it myself, that I don't want to like leave something unfinished because it annoys me, and yeah, a lot of players have this as well. Not all. There are players that handle that perfectly. They don't mind at all. But a lot of it's more unconscious than, for instance, the IKEA effect. And we also like things to stay the same. So that's kind of where the anchoring effect kind of comes back as well. It's like, okay, we're now used to this system. Why are you changing it? Players don't often not like that. Again, this is something to do with the context that we talked about, right? This is a toilet in a museum, which is looked at very differently than a toilet just in the men's room. So how you frame something has a big effect. And then case study, and then that's the end, and there's room for questions. So some of these things come back in TextExpress, obviously. So the FTE, we talked about it. It's critical. It's the only place where you can anchor the player freely. And it's the consideration phase actually at its highest point, right? They're still very open, but they're also very mindful of the experience itself, right? The subsequent play sessions are less, players are less aware of the fact that they're evaluating. Some examples of TextExpress of how we use anchoring. So the very first screen that the player sees in TextExpress is kind of like a movie poster that's very deliberate. It just not only looks like it's nice, but the fact that it's kind of like a movie poster tells the player this is not an average word game, which is just level after level. Here's character, story, there's things to like kind of get lost in, think about, fantasize. And that's what movie posters need to do, right? And that's why we used a movie poster as the loading screen to get kind of anchor the premise of our game, which is, hey, this is not your average word game. Then we do kind of the same with our unskippable cutscene. We did a test where we had a skippable cutscene and an unskippable cutscene. Unskippable cutscene had way higher day 30 retention, but only at day 30. So you'll see it very late. But that's because those players kind of went along with what we presented, which is like we kind of showed them, hey, this is what the game will bring you to at some point. All these nice places, these characters you're going to meet. Like there's like a little bit of drama, a little bit of romance, right? And that's all just setting it up like, hey, this is still not your average word game. There's a lot of things ahead. So bear with us, basically. Another part, we kind of do the same thing as we introduce the very first gameplay immediately in the story. The player needs to make the word run to make the main character run. So that's actually the very first time the player connects the letters into a word. We mix it again with the onboarding part. And again, because it's tied to the story, the character reacts to what the player just made, anchoring that, hey, this is not your average word game. Again, still in the same FTUE, the very first thing, cutscene, we also show a map with all these locations, right? So again, highlighting there's so much to do. Even the character talks about that, like, hey, there's so much to see, and I want to go out there in the world. I'll get back to the question. I see that's a bit interesting. As example of the elastic meta and like how it works in TextExpress. So you see tasks that you can complete. The very first level, you get 6 points out of the 24. But you can see it's already 24. It's not one level, one reward. This is about, let me see. Oh, again, the elastic meta. So here you see letter upgrades, right? So first letters are 1. The first time you upgrade it will be 2. So you immediately get a level where if you're upgraded letter, so you can immediately see, hey, I'm getting about twice as much points now. That's pretty cool. I'll move faster. So upgrading letters, but also extra points for ads, right? So we can immediately show ads. It's also part of the beginning of the game. So again, it's not a surprise to players. Like in the FTUE, there are ads. You can watch them or not watch them. That's still their choice, but it's part of the experience. Talking about anchoring, here we're talking about the same offer, but anchoring on a different level, which is anchoring prices to player time. And that's kind of an interesting topic, because the player spent a minute on, let's say, a minute on the level, right? Then we're saying, okay, for another 30 seconds, you can get 50% of what you did. We'll put in 50% more progress. And then we're saying, so your time is tied now to the time an ad takes. And the player unconsciously will kind of do the same math, right? Do I think it's worth it? I spend this, then they're offering me this. If you offer too much here, then they will devaluate their own time. So their own time will be coupled to, okay, so let's say the ad quadruples whatever the player did. They're going to say, okay, you spent 2 minutes on this, and then 30 seconds on this will do 4 times as much point. Then they will devaluate their own effort quite a lot. So that will have a negative effect. And then we're also like adding another currency saying, hey, 5 diamonds is also worth what an ad is worth, which is 50% of what your time spent is worth, right? So all of these things now become relatable to each other, and they're all put into the context, right? So immediately the player, it will be a hard decision, but they are aware of what things are worth all of a sudden. And I think that's interesting. Then here you can see a little bit, for instance, about the player journey, awareness and consideration. So again, the same offer. We show in blue how much the player will get extra in terms of what that progress means for the task. And again, we're showing, okay, you can have this purchase here, right? You have to be aware. You also see we're upselling the subscription here at the bottom. So if you don't like all of this stuff, that's fine. You can subscribe to the game. Almost there. Yeah, unfinished tasks, Zeigarnik effect. That's very clear. Don't need to go very much depth there. And IKEA effects, you can make your own train. There's like these choices on how the train is going to look. The player builds that stuff, and then before they get going and on their travel. So before they set out into the world, yeah, they will have built their own train, which makes them more likely to come back and retain a bit longer. I think that was the last one. Yes. There are questions, which I like.
Amazing! Wow, you managed to put so much information into such a short period of time, and I'm not going to waste the rest of your time by yapping. But that was amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So yeah, maybe we can dive into a few of these questions real quick. I'll just go back a little bit. Yeah. So Oleg's first question was, are there connections between larger download sizes and higher commitment, since they spent more time and space to install the game after all?
Yeah, I think, yeah, absolutely. So there are, I think the downside is of a larger game is absolutely that less players will install, so the CPIs will go up. So that is a bad thing. But the players that will install will retain a little bit longer because they did a bit more effort. So I think there's always that kind of, and you see it with very large games, right, that require you to like wipe your phone clean and make room, right? You'll give that more time, right, to evaluate.
Impact.
Absolutely, right? And, yeah. and I think Genshin Impact has a lot of things going for it, right? It's not just that they have a huge download size. Sure. But I do think it helps at least prolong the evaluation period. I put in effort, right? And also, like, you need to make sure that you have to set up this account and then download some more files. I know my first Genshin Impact experience pretty bad, actually, and I had to postpone it a couple of times before I actually could dive in because of how bad the experience was, how large the thing was, the account that you needed to set up. Then there was like connection errors. But eventually I gave it a try, and even though it's not really my type of game, I think I managed to stay in longer just to see, okay, what's all the fuss about? And yeah, I put in all this effort, right? It's kind of for making up for all the effort. Like, okay, I'm gonna, like, maybe I'll like it anyway, in my case. But obviously, many people like it.
They do.
But yeah.
It's like swings and
Absolutely.
roundabouts. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I'm just going to rattle through the questions as quickly as possible. So, a bit more of a general question here. So, do you feel like the backlash against unethical practices in free-to-play games has grown a lot stronger recently? And just more generally, how do you feel like the market has changed in the last couple of years?
Okay, so on the backlash side, I think the more players experience bad things, the more it will backlash. In general, I would say the more casual player will backlash way less, because on the one hand, they get used to it. They're also not used to how things were before. So I think it's a very vocal minority that makes a lot of fuss about unethical practices. I'm not saying they shouldn't. They should, but for a lot of players, especially on the casual side, they just don't know any better, right? And they're just still very new to games, and this is how their games are, and it's kind of where you got anchored, right? As a player, what's your first player experience with any game? That will kind of anchor your perception of how games should be, right? And a lot of hardcore PC console gamers, they are used to premium games, which offer like a very cool experience for a very high upfront cost, right? And a lot of casual players are not like, I'm not going to spend $70 on something I don't know anything about, right? Because they don't have that experience. They didn't grow up that way. I think, for instance, where things are starting to backlash, and I think it's good that it starts to backlash, is on the ad side. So ads get worse and worse and worse, and I think it's hurting our experience quite a lot. Yeah, the players are absolutely right that they can get fed up with that. So I hope that changes. I hope it backlashes. I hope it doesn't backlash too much for us. But yeah, as an industry, we are served with predictable ad experiences that last a particular amount of time, where maybe creators like game creators have a little influence over saying, and this is worth a short ad, so give me a short ad. This is worth a long ad, so give me a long ad, right? If we have a bit more influence over that, then it would serve, I think, both our interests. Currently, I think it's abusive, and it's really annoying for many players, and I think it's costing us all games that rely on ads a lot of retention. So I hope it backlashes fast and we can get over it.
I love that. I love that opinion. Okay, yeah, totally agreed. Another general question here: do you have any tips for promoting or monetizing a game that really worked well for you recently? Mikhail's question here says A/B test results or something special that you came across that you'd like to share with us.
Okay. What I found was really interesting, and I will quickly go back to this offer because there's so much in this offer here at the end of the level. What you don't see a lot is having an ad next to a premium currency where you can get the same thing, right? So here's ad or diamonds, and you do get, like, there's more of the buying away ads thing, like with ad tickets, which is kind of the same idea as this. And maybe a slightly improved version of this, actually, with the ad tickets a bit more clear for the player. But what we found out when we dived into our audience is that the high-paying players, we call them high rollers instead of whales, because we think a high roller is way more respective and kind of, but it also more explains how they perceive and are in the game world and how they value their time. And they value their time extremely. They hate ads because ads are like a waste of their time, and they feel very bad about it. And once we were aware of that, it was like, okay, but I want to offer them this extra value because it's interesting for them as a high roller to just spend on that because they like spending. That's their modus operandi. They really like spending. That gives them a feel that they're rich, and they're like, yeah, they can breeze through the game whenever they want, and that's the kind of experience that they're seeking. And I think that's totally valid, right? It's if you've got the money to spend on it, why not go for it, and then serve. And yeah, absolutely. And there's like way more people that are like, I don't want to spend anything. I'll rather watch an ad, right? So, and once I knew that, of course, we could do segmentation. But in the beginning, I was just there. Well, let's offer them both and see what happens, right? And we see that quite a lot of people are willing to spend some diamonds to skip the ad and still get the points, right? So for us, that's really interesting. I think ad tickets are a bit better because it's a bit clearer in communicating its value. That's one of our problems is that we've got currencies that are very multi-purpose. So our coins can be spent on numerous things, and our diamonds can be spent on numerous things, and people then kind of like, okay, we'll save them for later, maybe, right? And if currencies have more one-purpose currencies, then if you have ad skips, you'll use them because you can't use them on anything else.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Then if you have more time, I asked, was there, you mentioned that, I think all of us kind of went sort of, wow, when you said that the unskippable cutscene actually equaled a day 30 retention increase. And my immediate thought was, well, was there a cost to that?
Yes, of course. But it wasn't as big. So the upside was slightly bigger. And it was marginal. So, but we did see a slightly lower day 1 retention. And it kind of like even on day 7, and then a slightly higher day 30. So that's kind of how that progressed. I do think like we're now with the new publisher, and we're like this is already a game that's out in the market for a few years. I think the market already shifted from where we first started and where we are now. I think players now want more and faster. So I think we'll speed up a lot of the story things, and on the same hand, they want to like dive into the experience and want to play a bit more before they get the reward. So we'll probably change that whole FTUE, make the whole story bits faster, add a bit more puzzles in between. And you can see with this system, that's really easy to do for us, right? We can just add a few values for those tasks, and then players will need to play more levels. And another game that would be maybe very problematic. And for us, it's relatively easy to do.
Super interesting. Thank you. I think that also answers Oleg's second question as well, pretty much. And then we just had, I think, was it one final question? Yeah. So Mohammed wants to know, on average, how long does it take players to begin spending in a game? Is it something that you measure? And is it something that you try to make it happen earlier? Do early spenders tend to spend more in your experience?
So paying players, I would say about 30 to 40% spend on the first day, and high rollers spend faster. So there are and the behavior is super, for me, high roller behavior is super interesting because it's not how I am, but I love how I get to know them, right? And I have like a friend and an old colleague of mine who is a high roller in games, and she gives me a lot of like advice on that, and I just love how they think. But what they'll do easily, high rolling players, is just start a game. If they kind of like it already, they'll just buy the highest priced thing immediately,
right?
Because they kind of already know, okay, this is probably worth my time. Right, so in the first session, they'll just buy a $100 pack, and then they will evaluate what that gives them, right? So they hardly see the game in its free mode, right? They will just immediately get in VIP high rolls spending mode, and then if the game is designed well, they will be rewarded for that, right? That will be valuable for them in making their progress easier or harder, depending on the motivation, of course. But it will do something with the whole experience. But yeah, on the other hand, we also try to lure players, of course, with high discounts, offer them a lot of things. We try to give examples of things in the game before they buy. So we have hints. Players will get hints up front so they can spend and see how that works and how that helps their game before they need to buy it. And we'll do that with a lot of things. like we have customization as well in the game, so our characters can be dressed and the trains can be like modified even after the free stuff has been handed out. And people love that as well. Something we also didn't realize as much is that they really like to dress our Tilly, our protagonist. So yeah, Christmas, Valentine, there's all these outfits and people love it.
Amazing. All right. Well, I just got to say thank you so much, Tj'ièn, for that amazing breakdown. I think this is going to be a fantastic resource for our little community. We really appreciate it hugely. And thank you so much for everyone who has stayed to this point and everyone who came out to enjoy this masterclass. Just one final plea to join our Discord. It'll help you to keep on top of everything that's happening in the indie game scene, find out what's coming up next. And also, we have a little club going on of people who are learning to use AI tools so that you too can be a part of the coming revolution in gaming over the next few years. So, yeah, thank you so much, everybody. And, yeah, massive thanks to Tj'ièn. Yeah, hope you guys have a lovely evening.
Cool. Thanks, guys.